A lot of people believe supplements are safe. That's wrong. I think it's a pretty bad idea to just start adding a bunch of stuff randomly. Supplements do have risks, and often those risks have not been carefully evaluated, and we find out after the fact there's some risk of developing a particular condition or disease. Okay, so here's what I'm currently taking. I was in that 75 to 80% that was actually deficient in all three, and I was woefully deficient, and I was actually kind of pissed off that this had never been detected before because we never measure it in primary care. My name is Matt Caberline, and welcome to the Optispan YouTube channel. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Optispan podcast. Today, we are going to talk about supplements. So I get asked a lot, what supplements do I take? And I'm actually often very hesitant to answer this question because I feel like my supplement strategy is pretty boring, but maybe it's good for people to see that not everybody out there is a pill popper who takes 20 or 30 different things. So I thought what I'd do today is take you through kind of my personal situation, why I'm pretty conservative in my approach to supplements. And also I want to strongly emphasize though that, I'm learning as I go. I am absolutely reevaluating constantly what I do in terms of all sorts of lifestyle factors, but also including supplements, and constantly trying to evaluate the data and think about where do I see the best sort of risk-reward value in the things that I choose for myself. I also really want to emphasize that I am a strong believer that there is absolutely no one-size-fits-all for everybody. And so my one piece of advice is if somebody tells you with certainty you should be taking X supplement, that's all the red flag you need to move on, in my opinion. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of background on my current health status, I am 53 years old, 6 feet tall, 185 pounds, about 14% body fat based on my last DEXA. I'm in relatively good health, no chronic diseases diagnosed. Some biomarkers are suboptimal. For example, my HbA1c is a normal range, but higher than I'd like. Lipids, ApoB and Lp(a) also I would consider suboptimal. Some stuff going on with the hormones, which I'll get into in a future episode. Lowish free testosterone, borderline high FSH and LH. If that doesn't mean anything to you, don't worry about it. This is, some people would describe as relatively normal changes in hormonal status with age for men. Currently not taking any prescription medications. I'll come back to rapamycin in a minute. I'll put that in a different bucket for now, or any diagnosed pre-disease or disease. So again, I would characterize for my age, pretty good health. So again, I mentioned my supplement philosophy is that everyone's different. Do what works for you. If you feel like something's working for you, that's great. Even if it's placebo effect, that's great. I also want to say clearly that I personally don't think of supplements as really fundamentally any different than prescription medications. All of these things are biologically active molecules. All of them can provide benefits or cause harm or have no effect. The only real difference in my mind is that supplements are usually less bioavailable, usually less potent, and usually less specific, meaning they are generally less precise. From a biochemical perspective, they have many targets, or what people would call dirty drugs. And also, of course, they're easier to get your hands on because they are usually not regulated, usually sold over the counter. You can buy them on Amazon, things like this. But I think the critical point here is that supplements have risks very much like prescription medications do. They have side effects, of course. And I think people need to weigh those risks appropriately. And in general, I think people tend to overweight or overconsider the risks of side effects with prescription medications and underweight or underconsider the risks of side effects from supplements or things that you can buy over the counter. Obviously, in general, prescription medications have a higher risk profile to them. But I think from a relative perspective, the way people think about it in their heads, that risk-reward ratio does not actually reflect the real risk associated with supplements. And in general, people underestimate the risk that's associated with supplements because the assumption is if I can buy it over the counter, it must be safe. And that's just not true. I want to give you what I think of as some bad reasons to take supplements. One bad reason is out of fear. In general, it's not a good idea to do a whole lot out of fear, but I think a lot of people take supplements because they have a fear of death or a fear of getting sick. And if that's your only reason for taking a supplement, that's probably not a great rationale. I also think people sometimes take supplements out of a feeling of lack of control. There's a desire to do something, even if the evidence for that something isn't very good. And I would just suggest that it's better to approach supplements, lifestyle, prescription medications with rational thought and evaluation as opposed to based out of fear or a lack of control. I think another bad reason to take a supplement is because some influencer told you should. Most influencers are not experts in the things that they are influencing on. And it's been my observation, at least in the longevity field, most of them are not willing to actually do their homework to become informed. And honestly, that's part of the reason why I'm sitting here doing this now. I have sort of a unique background in the sense that I've been doing research and deep in the literature in longevity for 2 decades. And so I feel like, while much of this is going to be my opinion, at least when it comes to longevity, is based on a pretty deep knowledge of that field. It's been my observation that a lot of the popular influencers out there just get stuff wrong. And that's very frustrating. And so hopefully, I can provide a counterpoint to some of that misinformation that gets out there. Another bad reason is if a supplement company told you to take it. As I'll talk about in a minute, I have pretty high level of distrust for companies that sell nutritional supplements. And then the last thing is, I think, some people, and this gets back to the desire to do something, they feel like they should take supplements as a security blanket. And this is related to the idea that supplements also have risks. And so unless you're pretty confident that there's minimal risk associated with the supplement, taking it because you feel like it gives you a sense of security, could be counterproductive. So what are some good reasons to take supplements? Number one, at the top of the list, I would put fixing a measured deficiency. So this is where I would put things like, vitamin deficiencies, omega-3, things like that, where you can measure it, you see that you are deficient, and you take a supplement to fix that deficiency. Again, I've alluded to this in other episodes. I feel very strongly about measure, intervene, measure again. So I'm not a big fan of just popping a vitamin pill just because. I think if you know you're deficient and you can show that you have fixed that deficiency, that's a much better rationale for why you might take a particular supplement. Related to that is optimizing a measured biomarker. Again, very similar idea. If you have a biomarker that is suboptimal, you have a good reason to believe that a supplement or a prescription medication could move that biomarker in the right direction. You can then take that supplement or medication and see that, in fact, it does have that effect on the biomarker. The third one is a little bit more nebulous, but I would say that a good reason to take a supplement is if you have carried out a thoughtful and, to the best that you can, informed risk-reward analysis. And this is hard, right? Again, there's a lot of noise out there. I know it's very difficult for people to really feel like they can do an informed risk-reward analysis. Most people can't go do a deep dive into the scientific literature. But to the extent that you can, I think trying to really evaluate what is the risk-reward and what does that look like for me, if you've done that, you're in a much better place to make decisions about which supplements to take. And then finally, if it makes things better. If you take a supplement and it noticeably improves function or your feeling of well-being, great. Again, that might be placebo effect. It's hard to rule that out. Obviously, at the individual level, it's very difficult. But if it works for you and improves your quality of life, great. That's a great reason to take a supplement. Okay, so why I'm conservative about supplements. As I mentioned, I'm highly skeptical of the industry as a whole, supplement manufacturers and retailers. I'm also highly skeptical of most longevity, quote unquote, influencers or experts. I'm also pretty conservative because supplements are unregulated and often have unknown risk profiles. And this gets back to something I alluded to earlier, which is that, supplements do have risks, and often those risks have not been carefully evaluated. And we find out after the fact that there's some, higher than expected risk of developing a particular condition or disease caused by taking that supplement. But FDA doesn't take action oftentimes until it's too late for the people who have been affected. So I'm pretty cautious about approaching supplements from that perspective. And then in general, I'm not a big fan of taking a lot of supplements because I think when you start to stack one on top of the other, if you just think about a complex biological system, or it doesn't have to be a biological system, any complex system, if you just start randomly doing stuff, moving stuff around, the chances that you're going to make things worse are much, much greater than the chances that you're going to make things better. And that's true in your body as well. And so if you start putting a bunch of supplements and medications on top of each other, like we all know about polypharmacy, again, if you have a really good reason to believe that each of those things can have benefits, I'm pretty comfortable with that. But when you just kind of randomly start taking 20, 30, 40 different things, the likelihood that you're going to make things worse is just a lot greater than the likelihood that you're going to make things better. And so I'm not a huge fan of adding things to a stack without a really, really good reason to add that particular component. Okay, so I mentioned I'm pretty skeptical of the supplement business. Maybe this is obvious, but I think the reasons why I'm skeptical is it's largely unregulated, right? So there really are no guardrails or very few guardrails in place. And the guardrails that exist usually don't take effect until things have skewed so far off from where they should be that it's just, it's way, way out of bounds before FDA ever steps in. So that's something I'm concerned about. And obviously there's a pretty long history of snake oil and dishonest marketing. And all you have to do is go to pretty much any longevity supplement company website, and you will see dishonest and deceptive marketing. I think it's important to appreciate these companies don't care about you. Now, I'm not saying that the individuals are all bad people. That's not true. I know some people in the supplement industry who I like. They're friends of mine. They are good human beings. But the companies themselves, their goal is to make money. And the reality is there are a lot of shitty people in the supplement industry. And so I think you just have to be aware they're not in it for you. They want your dollars, and many of them will deceive you to get it. So I think the question to ask yourself is, why would you trust these people? Why would you trust these companies? Unless you have a really good reason to. I think in the longevity space, you really have to be aware of terms like anti-aging, healthy aging, promoting aging, target aging. All of these are really designed to deceive you into believing these things are going to increase your longevity or health span. There's really nothing in the supplement space that has been convincingly demonstrated to have a positive impact on health span, broadly speaking, in people. Certainly nothing that has been demonstrated to increase longevity. So all very speculative, and the speculation ranges from, some level of preclinical evidence to no preclinical evidence. So again, I think it's just important to be clear. There is no supplement proven to be anti-aging or promote longevity in humans. Full stop. So I've mentioned that I'm pretty skeptical of influencers or self-proclaimed experts. I think, it's important to just question people's motives, question their knowledge, and particularly question their interpretation. I think there are people who can be quite knowledgeable, have good intentions, but they arrive at an incorrect interpretation of the available data. I absolutely have arrived at incorrect interpretations of available data in my scientific career and in my personal life. We all do, right? But I think it's important to recognize people approach particularly areas around nutrition and supplementation with a huge set of biases and preconceived notions. There's a lot of faith. And so it's important to just recognize that well-intentioned people may be misleading you because they are bringing their own sets of biases and preconceived notions to the equation. So, I think you should question everybody, and you should question me. You should ask, why is this person saying this? What are they trying to sell me? Again, as I mentioned, if somebody speaks with 100% certainty about a particular supplement, in the absence of correcting a nutritional deficiency, I'd be pretty skeptical of that person. Okay, so having said all of that, what is my supplement philosophy? And again, my philosophy, I think, is to be relatively conservative, certainly at least compared to some of the people out there in the biohacking community. So again, my number one is supplement to deficiencies. Vitamins are a good example. If you're deficient, fix the deficiency. This is no brainer, right? Measure, intervene, measure again. So I can just give you an example from the data in our OptiSpan cohorts. About probably 75% of the people who have come through one of our programs so far are deficient in either vitamin D, vitamin B12, or omega-3, and often all three of those. So I think these are really three good examples where you can measure the deficiency. It's trivially easy to supplement to fix the deficiency, and then you can measure again and make sure you fix the deficiency. So that to me seems like it's got a really solid risk-reward ratio. I think in general, though, you always want to question why you think something will work. If you're considering adding a supplement to your stack, really internally do a little bit of self-evaluation and ask yourself, why do I believe this is going to help? Okay, so here's what I'm currently taking. Daily vitamin D, vitamin B12, and omega-3. So I was in that 75 to 80% that was actually deficient in all three. And I was woefully deficient in vitamin D. When I first learned this a couple of years ago, I was pretty shocked and realized, again, I've lived in sort of the Seattle area for much of my life. I've probably been deficient in vitamin D for much of my life. And I was actually kind of pissed off that this had never been detected before because we never measure it in primary care. So those are the three vitamin deficiencies that I supplement daily. I know they work because I've measured them. I supplement with protein in a protein shake. So I have a protein shake as my sort of morning meal, so to speak. That seems to work really well for me. I also add to the protein shake collagen. Collagen is pretty interesting, and I was pretty skeptical about collagen. And this actually came about from a conversation that Brad Stanfield and I had probably a year or two ago now that really made me take a closer look at the literature on collagen. I still don't get the biological mechanism there, but the data seem pretty compelling that a collagen supplementation has some benefits. And so I add collagen to the shake along with the protein powder. Collagen, of course, is another source of protein, so that works pretty well in the context of my protein shake. And then I've also started taking some prebiotics that I also add to the shake, particularly chia seeds and inulin powder. So those also are, I think, good sources to supplement fiber. I know some people are skeptical of prebiotic supplementation. I tend to agree with the folks who suggest that supplementing with a fiber on top of an unhealthy diet probably isn't going to have a huge impact, although there's literature out there that, again, I think is reasonably good, showing some modest benefits from probiotic supplementation, even on top of what I would consider a relatively unhealthy diet. But I certainly wouldn't want to suggest that you should supplement with prebiotics in place of dietary fiber. And then I take creatine powder every day. Again, I'm not 100% positive that this has had a significant impact on me, but many, many people who know more than I do about muscle biology swear by it. And I do think it has helped me increase my lean mass at the same time that I lost fat mass. So I continue to take creatine. Again, I think there's very little downside to any of these things, so I feel pretty comfortable having these as kind of the core of my supplement stacks. Every once in a while, I've taken athletic greens. I'm actually not really doing that anymore. I think athletic greens is essentially just a multivitamin that has been marketed really, really well, but it's a good multivitamin. I've started taking magnesium. Peter Attia had a pretty good episode on that recently. One of the challenges here is it's hard to really measure a deficiency. But again, I think the downside to a magnesium supplement, really very little. Okay, and then rapamycin. So I mentioned that I would come back to rapamycin. I also mentioned that I don't really think about prescription medications as any different than over-the-counter supplements in terms of the way they work. I think of rapamycin in this case as a supplement because I'm not taking it for a given chronic disease. So if you've watched other episodes on this channel in the R files, you will have learned that I cycle rapamycin periodically. I'm honestly not all that scientific about the way that I approach it, but usually these are 12-week cycles with 6 months to a year off between cycles. And I think this is the one thing where, people can reasonably question my risk-reward analysis. I think people can honestly disagree about where the risk-reward falls for something like rapamycin. I get it. I don't recommend other people take rapamycin, but I'm personally comfortable with my own protocol, and I would say I have taken what I think is a pretty rational approach to my own risk-reward analysis. And so that's where I'm at with rapamycin. So some things I'm considering adding in the relatively near future. So I've actually been pretty intrigued and convinced by the evidence on low-dose tadalafil. And so the idea here is that, 2.5 mg a day, there's some evidence that it can improve blood flow, can be a preventative for benign prostate hyperplasia. I think the risks, again, are pretty low. And so I'm starting to feel like this may be a pretty good bet for, somebody at my age with my current health status as a preventative and to maybe improve vascular blood flow. I think the evidence on calcium AKG is pretty interesting. I like calcium AKG because both the calcium and the AKG could have benefits. A lot of people in the longevity space don't realize this, but calcium AKG was actually first developed as a calcium supplement. And there's good reasons for bone health, right, to take a calcium supplement, at least for some people. So I don't currently take calcium AKG, but I would put that on the short list. I also think urolithin A is pretty interesting. So urolithin A is a natural product that is produced by microbes in our gut. And there's accumulating evidence both in animal models like mice and a few small clinical trials in people that it is an activator of mitophagy that can have some potential benefits on muscle function and mitochondrial health. So this seems like a pretty intriguing compound. Again, I haven't added that to my current supplements, but it's on the short list of things I might consider. So again, I try to keep an open mind. I recognize there's a lot that I don't know, and I am absolutely willing to change my opinion as I learn more or as new data comes in. So I just want to finish up now by talking about some myths that a lot of people believe about supplements. And I've alluded to these already, but it's worth maybe just explicitly calling them out. So myth number one, a lot of people believe supplements are safe. That's wrong. Just because a supplement is sold over the counter does not mean it's safe. In fact, if you go to the FDA website, this is what it says. Before you decide to take a supplement, you should know that the FDA does not approve dietary supplements for safety or effectiveness or their labeling before they are sold to the public. Okay? So FDA is not giving them a stamp of approval. FDA honestly doesn't really evaluate the safety of a lot of things that are, quote unquote, generally recognized as safe. I know that seems odd, but there have been cases where things that were generally recognized as safe were taken off the market by FDA because we realized that, in fact, they are not safe. So it's just important to appreciate that just because something is sold over the counter does not mean that it is safe. In the very next paragraph, dietary supplement companies are responsible for ensuring that their products are safe and accurately labeled. So we've already talked about this. Do you trust the dietary supplement companies enough to risk your own health? I don't. Okay, myth number two, supplements are natural, medications are artificial, and a corollary of that is that therefore supplements are better. Okay, so let's start with the corollary. It is definitely not the case that natural molecules are better or worse than artificial ones. Many natural molecules will kill you just as quick as some artificial ones, and many artificial molecules are safe and extremely useful. So I think a case in point here is aspirin. This is one of the most important drugs in the past 150 years, and it is not found in nature. Now, is aspirin completely safe? No, of course not. Everything has a dose response. You can identify toxic doses of almost any molecule. There are many, many people who die from aspirin toxicity every year. It is also probably the most widely utilized drug in the world, or at least one of them. And it can be used safely by millions, hundreds of millions of people, and it is an artificial molecule. So again, I think you just need to get out of this mindset that there's a fundamental difference between natural and artificial molecules. Okay, now on to the main myth that supplements are always natural and medications are always artificial. So part of this is a confusion around the word supplements versus over-the-counter or unregulated medications versus prescription medications. So in general, artificial or synthetic molecules are almost always going to be categorized as a medication, but they could be over-the-counter. Okay, we talked about aspirin, over-the-counter, or more often, they will be prescription medications. Many natural molecules are also prescription medications. And often this is for kind of obscure reasons having to do with bureaucratic rules, how the molecules were developed, and sometimes profiteering by people who are hoping to get rich. I think an interesting example of the latter is nicotinamide mononucleotide, which I mentioned briefly before. So this is a molecule. It's found in every living cell in the world, including every cell in our bodies. It is part of a class of molecules called NAD precursors, along with nicotinamide riboside, another NAD precursor. So natural molecule. Nicotinamide riboside, which is again very closely related to nicotinamide mononucleotide, has been sold as a supplement over the counter for many years. That's a longer topic, but NMN has only really been on the supplement market for a relatively short period of time, in part because NMN has been more difficult to synthesize and more expensive to synthesize at scale. So it's only recently that that technology got to the point where NMN could be affordable on the over-the-counter market. After NMN was already on the market and being sold as a supplement, a company called Metro Biotech tried and succeeded in getting FDA to reclassify NMN as a drug. They also tried, and so far haven't yet been successful, in getting companies selling NMN to pull it from the market. So again, personally, as I mentioned, I don't think taking NMN is a great idea, but I think this whole story just shows exactly how ridiculous and in some ways corrupt the system for regulating supplements and medications is. I mean, there is simply no scientific justification for classifying NMN as a regulated drug, while NR is classified as an unregulated supplement. So to my mind, this is really a case of corporate greed and bureaucratic incompetence, really clouding the situation and confusing a lot of people. So I think another good example of natural molecules that are prescription drugs are hormones like testosterone and estrogen and insulin and growth hormone. All of them are regulated. All of them are prescription. All of them are natural molecules found in every one of our bodies. But again, in another example of the sort of lack of rational thought put into how these things are regulated, the hormone precursor, DHEA, can be purchased over the counter as a supplement without any regulation. And it's completely unclear why testosterone would need to be a prescription medication while DHEA can be purchased over the counter. All right, and last but not least, myth number 3, I should just take everything that might help. Better safe than sorry. So we've already, I think, addressed this one pretty well, but I think, again, there are a couple of problems with this approach. First is it's really expensive. So maybe if you're a billionaire, doesn't matter. But for most people, the money spent on supplements could be put to much better use elsewhere for improving their health. Also, this approach makes the assumption that all supplements are safe, which we've already debunked. And again, even less well understood is the effect of taking many, many different supplements all stacked on top of each other. I mentioned before, if you take any complex system, you start randomly changing stuff around, the likelihood you're going to make it better is much less than the likelihood that you're going to make it worse. So again, I think it's a pretty bad idea to just start adding a bunch of stuff randomly with the idea that it's somehow better safe than sorry. You might actually be having a negative outcome by doing that. And so this is why I tend to align on the philosophy that you're probably better changing things you're pretty confident need to be fixed or things that will be improved by whatever strategy you're going to employ. And that's really the reason for my relatively conservative approach to supplements. So Hopefully you are not disappointed that Matt is not taking a million different things, but if you are, I'm sorry, that's just the reality. Hopefully, instead, this has been informative, maybe at least got you to think a little bit more about why you're doing what you're doing in terms of your own approach to lifestyle, nutritional supplements, prescription medications. As always, if you have comments or questions, please leave them below. If you like the content, I would encourage you to subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you next time on the OptiSpan podcast.